It's always tough to me when somebody comes up and prays like that and does what they just did, and they start to make me cry right off the bat, and then I got to sit up here and talk, you know? Well, guys, I'm going to do something a little different this morning. You know, normally I teach straight out of the Bible, and we go from there. This morning, I'm going to do basically a monologue of a story out of the Bible, and I'm going to do it like it's me, all right? A lot of people ask me all the time, well, I just don't know enough to share the gospel. If you know the story of Jesus, and you know your story, you have enough to share the gospel. That's it. Nobody can argue with your testimony. It's yours. Nobody can argue with the fact that Jesus was born, lived, claimed to be the Messiah, died on a cross, and rose on the third day. They can't argue with that. They can say they argue. It is the most documented fact in history.
Amen.
All right? So the reality is, you can't argue with that. But one of the reasons I want to do this is I always look in the Bible. Every Mother's Day, I look for a female character. We did Deborah this year. I asked God all week, what character do you want me to talk about? And He didn't let me know nothing until Friday. And then I read up on him, even more, which I already knew the story, but I read up on him. And I said, okay, God, how do you want me to share it? He said, tell the story. I said, okay, I'll read it out of the Bible. He goes, no, tell the story. All right? So you ready? You ready for the story?
Yeah.
All right. When I was a young man, I had my eyes on this young lady. We'll call her M. And M was beautiful. My father had told me that I needed to start looking for a bride because I couldn't live in his house forever. And so I started looking, and there was this little gal that caught my eye early on. And as I watched her grow up around my family and all that stuff, I started going, ooh, that's the one. And so one day, I talked to my daddy, and then I went and talked to her daddy, and I said, I really want to ask M to be my wife. Would that be all right with you? And they said, that would be all right. And so we got engaged. And in our culture, when you got engaged, that actually meant the man left because he went to build the house or to remodel the house. He went to prepare a place for them to have a family. And so I went and I worked my normal job, which was building yokes at the time. Yokes are an interesting thing. It's linking two animals together that don't really want to do the same thing. But when you yoke them together, they have this ability and this power to do something that's beyond their own selves. And so I was building yokes, and I went to work for this man building yokes. And then when I would get off work, I would work on our house. Well, this went on for about 6 months, and I finished early. So I came home, and I wanted to see my M. So when I went to see her, I said, hey, it's good to see you. What's going on? She says, I need to talk to you about something. Why don't you come back about supper time, and I'll put on your favorite, spaghetti. And I said, I'll be back. And so we sat at the table. I came back. We sat at the table, and I looked her in the eyes, and she looked me in the eyes, and we Google-eyed each other and started thinking about our future and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden, we were through eating, and all of a sudden the conversation began to change. And Em said, I got to talk to you about something really serious. Now, Joe, Be patient with me and hear everything I have to say before you get mad. But I'm pregnant. And I immediately, man, you talk about the hair stand up on the back of my neck. And all I could think is, who's the guy? And did he take advantage of you? Or did you sell me out? Or whatever. And she told me to sit down. She said, listen to me. I have to tell you the story. I was sleeping one night about 6 months ago after you'd left. And I had a dream. In the middle of that dream, an angel showed up. And that angel told me that the Spirit of God was going to come over me. And I was going to become pregnant. And I said, how can this be? I'm a virgin. That's impossible. And he said, no, it's possible because all things are possible with God. I'm looking at her and I'm thinking, you've got to be coming up with this lamest story I ever heard in my life. There is no way. She said, no, listen, Joe. He told me he was the Messiah. He told me he was going to rescue the world from its sin. You know, we've been looking for the Messiah. We know, I always figured he would just show up one day and he would have this royal looking look about him and he would be on a white horse and he would ride in and he would kick the Romans out and everything would be okay. And I don't understand, but that's what the angel told me. I got up from the table, I threw my napkin down and I said, we'll talk about this tomorrow. So I went home and I tried to sleep as I paced the floor. My dad asked me twice, what's going on? I said, nothing. I just can't believe she did this. And I can't believe this stupid story. Finally, somehow, I went to sleep. Lo and behold, I started to have a dream. And then an angel showed up and said the same exact thing to me as he said to him. I went, oh my gosh. And then the angel told me something that made it even harder. He told me I had to name the baby Jesus. In my culture, you name the firstborn son after the daddy. Everybody's going to know something's up when I call him by a different name. But Jesus means he saves. Amen. So I went back. I saw Mary the next day. And I told her I was sorry about getting mad at her about her story. Because the angel had showed up in my dream too. And had told me everything that he had told her. So we went ahead and got married. She wore a big fluffy dress so nobody could tell she was pregnant. Because I don't know that I could have stood the shame. I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to raise another man's child or the Son of God. What does that even mean? How am I going to do this? All of these things are running through my head, and we get married that day and we go home, and Mary and I decided not to even have sex until the baby was born. Because how would we know? How would we know for sure? So we didn't have a normal marriage ceremony. But you know, I love that Em. She's beautiful. And she's got something in her eyes right now that is beyond any pregnant woman in what I've ever seen. What's crazy is I got up the next morning, there was a letter in the mail. Said we had to go to Bethlehem. Because in Bethlehem is where we got to go pay our taxes. Man, I've been working so hard on the house. I put every dime into the house. I ain't got the money for the taxes, but I've scraping it together somehow. Now we got to travel 80 miles to go to Bethlehem to pay the taxes. Em said, let's go. So we got up the next morning and we went. It took us a week and a half to get there because we had to stop about every mile and go to the bathroom. And if we wasn't going to the bathroom, we couldn't get her just right on the donkey. I put all of my good shirts under her so that she'd be a little more comfortable. But you know what was crazy? She didn't complain a lick. She just said, let's stop, I need to go to the bathroom. So it took us about 10 days to get there, which means we got there late, because by the time we got there, every motel in town was full. We even asked somebody if we could sleep on their porch, and they said no, they'd already rented it to 3 other people. But this one innkeeper, the guy at the Motel 6, he said, I got a barn out back. And there's a stable in there that I don't have a horse in right now. And there's a manger in that stable, and maybe that'll help. And I went out and told Mary, and she says, whatever it takes, it's time. Man, I've never delivered a baby before. Where's the midwife? Where is a midwife here? Mary said her water just broke. Oh my gosh. So I got her in the barn. I laid down my best shirt. I laid down her best dress that we had packed, and we put her on top of it. Oh my gosh, there was blood everywhere. I never seen anything like this. But then there was this little guy, and he had this look in his eye that was amazing. And he was beautiful. And I looked at him and I said, your name? Your name is Jesus, because you're going to take away the sins of the world. I don't even know what that means, but that's your name. About the time we wrapped him up in my other shirt, after we cleaned him all off, and the cow licked him a couple of times, I put him in the manger. And I would have never thought that had made a great bed, but you know what? When you fluff it all up with shirts and dresses and all of that, it was pretty good. And he just went right to sleep. And then all of a sudden there was this commotion outside the barn, and about 20 shepherds were standing there looking in the barn. I said, can I help you? And they said, is there a baby in here? Is it laying in a manger? And I said, yeah. He's right here. And they said, is his name Emmanuel? And I said, well, I named him Jesus. And Jesus means he takes away the sins of the world. They said, that'll do. The angel that we saw in the field, in the pasture out there about an hour from here, told us a king was going to be born today. And he would be called Wonderful Counselor, Emmanuel. He would take away the sins of the world. And I'm thinking to myself, my gosh, God, what have you done to me? I don't know what to do. I'm a simple, poor carpenter. What do I know about raising a child that's not even mine? And then, oh my gosh, then I realized the shepherds are gossip central in Bethlehem. There is nothing going to be kept secret now. I was kind of on the down low here, thinking that we would just kind of hide and figure this thing out as we go. Now, no, everybody knows. And when they left, they were shouting and praising God, and they said, did you see that army of guys that had wings that showed up that were praising God? I looked at Em and I said, my gosh, what have we gotten ourselves into? And she said, I don't know, Joe, but everything's going to be just fine because God has got this. So you know, it was crazy. Em didn't feel very good for a couple of weeks, and that couple of weeks turned into a month, and so I decided, I found a yoke builder in town, and so I went to work for him, and we rented a little house And we stayed there for about a year and a half. And one day the craziest thing happened. When I was at the yoke builder's office, some guy came in and said a caravan was coming to town, and it was the wealthiest people he'd ever seen in his life. Camels as far as the eye could see. And I thought, what in the world is going on? That night I went home and told him, my gosh, there's camels coming to town, like a caravan, and rich guys coming to town. They call them traders. They trade for everything that you can imagine. These guys are wealthy. I've never seen a wealthy person. I got up from supper, and all of a sudden there was a knock on the door. And I opened the door, and there stood the wealthiest man I ever seen in my life. From head to toe, there was little bands of gold sewed in all of his clothing. He had this look like a king, and he spoke with a heavy accent, like he was from Persia. I could barely understand him, but what I could make out is he asked me if my name was Joseph, and I said yes. And he said, do you have a baby? And I said yes. And he said, did you realize there's a star over your house? And I said, no, I noticed the night sky was a little brighter than normal. He said, well, we've been following this star for a year because it's 1,000 miles from Babylon to Jerusalem. I looked at him and said, what in the world have we gotten ourselves into? And he said his buddies brought gifts and they wanted us to come outside. And so we went outside and they said, can we see the baby? Can we see the King of the Jews? And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, it's one thing for him to be the Messiah. It's another thing for him to be the King of the Jews. Who am I to be responsible for the King of the Jews? And they bowed down and they worshiped our baby. And then they brought out these 3 gifts, and these 3 gifts were gold, frankincense, and myrrh. This is the most expensive thing I ever seen in my life. I don't know if you know this, but this stuff is worth about $10,000. I couldn't make $10,000 in 20 years. Why would they be giving us such gifts? And then they said they had to leave because they made the king mad. And King Herod is nobody to be trifled with. And they left. And Mary and I now, everybody in Bethlehem knows we have money. Everybody in Bethlehem knows we have the King of the Jews. What are we supposed to do now? And we went to bed that night, and that angel guy showed up again. And he told us to get out of town immediately. King Herod was going to try to kill Jesus. Oh my gosh. Where are we supposed to go? He said, go to Egypt. Oh my gosh. Egypt's another 80 miles away. It's going to take us a week and a half to get there. 2 weeks with the baby. What am I going to do for work? Oh, wait a minute. They gave us all these gifts. Oh my gosh. So we packed up that night and we left town. 2 weeks later, we found ourselves in Egyptian territory. King Herod had no jurisdiction there. In fact, King Herod and the Egyptians were not friends. And the Egyptians had been looking for a carpenter in that region. So they asked me to go to work. We paid for our house in advance with some of the money, and we paid for a house for 5 years. And we lived there, and little Jesus grew. And then came this awful report that a whole bunch of babies had gotten killed in Bethlehem because they were looking for Jesus. And that's when I knew, oh my gosh, I've got the hardest job in the world. How am I going to protect this child? How am I going to protect the King of the Jews, the Messiah, Emmanuel? Who am I? Who am I to do this, God? My gosh, my God and my relationship got really tight, really quick. And I began to talk to him every day about what I was supposed to do. Mary had this thing going on in her. She just always looked like everything was fine. And she didn't worry about nothing. And one day, we heard that King Herod was dead. And that angel told us it was okay to go home. And I was planning on just going back to Bethlehem, but he said, no, go to Nazareth. You know what the crazy thing was? Is there's a scripture that says the Messiah will be a Nazarene. I never thought about that before until now. Every move we're making is fulfilling prophecy. I don't even know if I'm in control. My goodness. God, what's going on? And he would tell me every day, just teach the boy everything you know. Love that boy with all your heart. Be the best dad that little boy can have. Sow into him everything that I have taught you through your father. And so I did. And then one day I began to get sick. Jesus was about 20 years old. He could do everything I could do. He could actually do it better. It was crazy. It was the craziest thing. It was like he was natural. It's like working with wood for him was like he created the wood. It was the weirdest thing. And one day I called him into the bedroom and I said, Jesus, listen, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to recover from this. Whatever's going on, I think I'm dying. And Jesus looked at me with the most tender eyes and he said, it's going to be okay. I got this, Dad. My Father, who is greater than all, has given you to me as my daddy, and you will never perish. You will live with me forever. Thank you for everything you have done for me. And I remember he called me in about 3 days later and he said, Jesus, it's today. Mary had been crying all day. Mama had been crying. And I looked at him and I took his hand. And I said, Jesus, I love you. You have been a great son. Please do me one favor. Your brothers are not old enough to do what they need to do. Would you please look after your mama until God tells you the day? And he said, Dad, you don't have to worry about a thing. I got this. You have taught me well, and my Father in heaven is watching over everything. And what's amazing is when you pass away, Dad, I will see you soon. And it's all going to be okay. I love you. And then I passed away. And it was the weirdest thing. Because I was afraid of it at first, and now I embraced it. And you know what was crazy? I got to hug God.
Amen.
God himself greeted me in heaven.
Hallelujah.
And he told me I did a good job. I thought I was the worst dad ever. I thought I didn't do nothing right. But he reassured me that everything I did was just right. And I thanked him for giving me the opportunity to be Jesus' dad. I think you've figured out the story, have you not?
Yes.
Guys, men, the greatest thing you can do in your life is to be a dad. I know some of you men don't have any kids. Doesn't matter. I got an adopted one. You can adopt one. I know a man right here in town that's a member of a prominent church who is a single dad because he adopted a boy. And he's raising him as his own. If God puts that on your heart, do it. If you're just a baby daddy, I'm going to tell you right now, it's time to step up.
Amen.
And be the man you're supposed to be. And become a daddy. You say, well, Jim, I don't know how. Well, guess what? I'm a daddy of a whole congregation.
Hallelujah.
I only had 3 kids to practice with. And God does an amazing thing when He uses a man, when a man says, I'll do it.
Amen.
So He can use you. But then you daddies who are out there who have already taken your responsibility. And you've begun to love your children. Some of you have just recently got your kids back. Thank you for stepping up and doing the right thing so that you could get your kids back. Thank you. Now, as I've told you before, don't let your children run the house. Quit reacting to them. Start to get a plan in your head according to what God is telling you and raise up that child the way it needs to be raised. Don't just be getting on to that child all the time. Tell them the things that they need to become. Tell them who they are. As I've told you my story many times, one day I was telling my wife I was aggravated with our kids and how they were disrespecting her and disobeying her and how I had to come home and spank them or put them in the corner or do whatever it was. Why did I have to be the disciplinarian? And then one day God told me, you don't have to be the disciplinarian. You just need to be a dad. Why don't you start telling them who they are? And from that day forward, I started telling my kids they were good kids. And they became good kids because I quit telling them they were bad. I quit telling them that they would never measure up, and I started telling them who they could become.
Amen.
And they believed it.
Yes. Amen.
And I am proud of all of my kids.
Hallelujah.
And I'm proud of these kids that I see growing up.
Yes.
Thank you for hearing this story today. But I want you to hear something within this. When you say, I don't think I can share the gospel, or I don't think I can share Jesus, did I not just tell you the story of Jesus and I didn't open the Bible one time? Right? Did I not proclaim who the Savior of the world is?
Yes.
And I didn't open up the Bible one time. But it's written on my heart because I read it all the time. I study it. I ask God what it means, and He reveals it to me.
Yes.
And so all I did in 20 minutes of time is tell you a story. So you can share the gospel too.
Yes, I can.
It's not the preacher's job to win the world. The preacher's job, believe it or not, is to love and nurture you.
Amen.
It's your job to go tell the world.
Yes.
And before I became the preacher, I told the world.
Yes.
I was a carpenter on a job site. On any job site, I prayed Jesus Jam all the time, and I shared my faith every day with somebody.
Hallelujah.
So you can do it. You can do it. Be the dad you need to be. And I'm going to leave you with this. Thank you for Father's Day and the fathers that are in this room. Thank you for doing an impossible job that God has given you the ability to do. You just don't know it.
Amen.